Hello and welcome to Hare and the Hawthorn. My name's Kate Ray. We're coming to you today with an extra special episode. So every time I've had this in my head, I've gone, it's our 100th and 11th episode, but it's not, it's our 100th episode. So it's not quite our Hobbit episode. So we're going to do a bit of a review of Hare and the Hawthorn overview, looking at some past guests and just chatting about the subjects that we've come across. Before I get into that, I've got some bits of news that I want to cover before handing you over to Neil. The first bit of news is, so we put a shout out to see how many of you would be interested in having a YouTube community page on Facebook. So I've set that up. So you can find us at Hare in the Hawthorn YT Community. I'll drop a link below. So please come along to the page if you want to discuss. I haven't had a drink. I'm on the tea. Let me tell you. Well, we're going to do a drunken pixie one, but I'm not. It's definitely tea in here. So that's going to be for you to come along and discuss any topics that we've been chatting about. Also, catch up with me and Neil. So we'll be dropping in on a regular basis, I hope, to say hello and to chat about things that we're not very technically advanced to chat about on here. With that in mind as well, I really can't talk tonight. What's going off? We also have a Ko-Fi fund, which you can find. It's Hare in the Hawthorn on there. So if you want to buy us a cup of coffee, you can drop us a small donation, which definitely helps towards things like the Zoom package, and we're always grateful for people for doing that. I need to mention a couple more things. Sorry, Neil, I know you're waiting there patiently. So we're we're also on the Ghost Planet Network, and that is run by a dear friend of mine, Neil Packer, from the Haunted Antique Centre. And this year we were up for, Hare in the Hawthorn was up for an award. Unfortunately, we missed out by a cat's whisker on receiving that award. So hopefully next year we'll be up again. And I will remember to put a thing out on social media to say, please vote for us, because that's something that I didn't do, which probably let us down quite badly. But that's one of those things. But it was a pleasure to be part of that award and go to the ceremony. Although I couldn't drag Neil along, his tuxedo was in the dry cleaners for that one. So yeah. I'm going to hand you over to Neil, and he's going to do a quick hello and get us kicked off with today's episode.
Oh, thank you, Kate. Yes, amazing that you've put together 100 of these podcasts. I mean, some of our viewers probably do podcasts of their own. I know some of them do, but many of them maybe won't. And it can be quite a lot of work in terms of especially trying to get guests on board and booking them up and then doing a bit of research into the guests. I mean, you don't just get someone on and ad lib it. You've got to know where these people are coming from, and so it does take a lot of time. And of course, it's done for the love of the subject. But we're certainly not making Joe Rogan money from doing Hare and the Hawthorn. In fact, we're making no money at all, apart from when you buy a coffee for Hare and Hawthorn. So it's all very much appreciated. But we're not doing it for the money. That's not the reason we're doing it. And I've loved doing it for 3 years now.
I know.
3 years I've been on board. I know I'm not always around, but obviously, I'm sailing the yacht in the Caribbean every now and then, so I can't come on board sometimes. But so 100 episodes. I want to say sort of congratulations to you as well, because it's you who started this up. And although we're going to go very, very briefly through all of the guests that Kate and I have interviewed, 21 of them.
I know.
21 different guests, and so we're going to do that during the course of this podcast. But I think, the obvious starting place is for you, Kate, to talk about, how did you start it up? What was your frame of mind, frame of reference when you were thinking, oh, I want to start a podcast and I want to talk about the fairies? Um, and how did you do it? And what happened at the beginning? This is before me. This is before I even heard of you. So do you want to just go into that a little bit?
Yeah, so like a lot of people, it was right at the very beginning of the pandemic, and I was missing social interaction. I had a year before been on Help My House is Haunted on a case involving a pixie. So I had done some remote viewing for the team, and I was more and more coming across these beings that weren't the spirits of the dead within haunted environments. And it set me off on this quest of how much do I actually know about the fairies? What do I know? What are my limitations? And I had this idea that the best way to explore this was to talk to other people from totally different perspectives about their experiences and understanding of what fairies were in relation to the paranormal. So that was the very beginning of it, and it was purely selfish in the fact that I wanted to speak to, I wanted the excuse to speak to some brilliant people about a subject that I was fascinated with and didn't feel as though I had any credentials to shoulder information to give back to the paranormal community about what these beings were. So shall I just talk you through my very first guest? And I remember to this day exactly how I was feeling. Shall I talk you through that?
Yeah, go for it.
So, in the first instance, Hare and the Hawthorn, my plan was that there were going to be tea break chats. So, 30 minutes, 35 minutes maximum of a very tight schedule of questions and answers as opposed to a conversation with people. And my very first guest was the absolutely gorgeous David Wells. I know David quite well. If you don't know him, he probably is most famous in the kind of media world for his work that he did on Most Haunted. I'm not endorsing Most Haunted. It's a great piece of entertainment, but let's not go down that avenue. But David, for me, really shone out in that program as somebody who was incredibly genuine, and he almost always felt like he had much more depth than just being a medium in a box. And I got to meet him on a few occasions, and got on with him very, very well. I went to some of his meditation circles in London, caught up with him on a few occasions on weekend workshops. And I got him on because I'd been doing a course under him, under his guidance, that was about Kabbalah. It was something that very much interested me. And I will do a future episode about how David Wells broke my brain. We will sit down. I'm getting ready to tell that tale. It's quite a number of years that I've plucked up enough courage, but I think I might come on and tell that tale. I don't think he'll mind. So the day that I was set to interview him, I I was more nervous than going to a job interview. I was absolutely terrified, even though I knew David, I knew his work really well, I knew his personality. I knew he would be a very easy guest to talk to about what the fairies are in relationship to Kamala. And I had written about 25 questions. I had been mulling them over. I had to go out for an hour's walk before I sat down for the podcast because my nerves were hitting so bad. And let me tell you, that kind of state of anxiety, it probably took about 2 to 3 years. It was perhaps just before you joined me for that first interview, Neil, that the nerves were so intense, so intense. I look back now and I laugh at myself of just how incredibly organized and administrative I was of the whole process, because I'm like, whatever now, it's like it'll go where it goes and how it goes. So yeah, that was in a nutshell. It was me wanting to find out answers that I didn't feel qualified to give back into the community, the paranormal community.
Yeah, no, that's great. And the anxiety thing, I mean, this is another thing. I mean, most people watching you and I now will think, oh, it's just two people having a chat, even if there's a guest there. And it kind of is like that. It's very conversational, like you say. It's not question and answer session. But whenever you start something new like this, you're most people, I think, will have certain levels of anxiety. Um, for me, it's usually it's not on Hare and the Hawthorn. It's if I'm on another channel and I'm being interviewed,
Mm,
especially if it's quite a big channel. I remember when I was interviewed on Iconic, David
yes.
Icke's um, platform. That was very anxiety inducing because there's going to be lots of people watching it, and they're going to lots of people potentially taking a very adversarial position to you, and it was just, oh my god, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
but for Hare and Hawthorn, it's over the years, it's we've worked out how to do it and how we want to interview people.
Mhm.
um and I think it works really well. I think that, like you say, you're not firing questions at someone.
Mm,
Right, I've got the answer to that. Now here's the next question. That wouldn't work in this kind of format in what we're trying to do. And I think
no,
guests appreciate that sort of that way of doing things. Um,
I
the
think
the
I think with that in mind, my biggest the biggest thing that I take from this is, and it does happen quite a lot when a guest says, "I forgot that we were recording," and I love that. I love the fact that we can create an environment where people feel very comfortable about talking about subjects that are not particularly well received, in the greater scheme of things, and they feel comfortable enough knowing that we and I hate this, it's such a hippie thing to say, but we hold space for them to be able to talk about things that they're passionate about, but in an environment that's not only sympathetic but empathetic, to their
yeah,
situation. So I do want
yeah,
to briefly talk about you, Neil, if you don't mind.
go on then.
in a good way.
Oh,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah, go on. I'll be the judge of that. Go on.
so I had been on my own for just over a year, I think, before I interviewed you, and I remember it was Thomas Sheridan who said, "Get Neil on." No, he just said catch up with Neil because we were having similarities in our life. Me with the temporal lobe epilepsy, and you with the Charles Bonnet, and that's how we kind of connected. And I remember becoming a Neil Rushton botherer to get you on. And obviously that time, during the lockdowns and stuff, it was such a stressful time. And we kept kind of, do we, don't we? And blah, 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 blah. And then eventually when I got you on, I was so pleased and so pleased. And even more over the moon when you said you'd come and co-host with me, because I just knew it would work. And I want to tell you from that very first interview that we did is in the top 5 biggest hits of interviews that we have on Hare in the Hawthorn. And I've just checked today, it just keeps rising and rising and rising, the people going back and watching that very
Yeah,
first interview, which is absolutely lovely. And I think when I look back at that, and then the one that we did, the very first one that we did together, still how nervous I was about being in that situation, not being able to relax. But getting you on board did shift massively the dynamic. It took a lot of pressure off of me, for a start, because you've got another. I think you're slightly more logical, whereas I kind of want to dig into people's personalities and psychology of things, where um, you're very good at looking at sort of broader pictures and bringing things out from a broader sense, really. So yeah, publicly thank you. I want to say publicly thank you.
yeah. Well, Thank you very much. Well, I've enjoyed it. Well, if I didn't enjoy it, I wouldn't be here 3 years later, would I? It would have just been like, and that I mean, when you interviewed me the first time, okay, that's an interview. That's kind of what I do all the time, and it was a very, very pleasant, easygoing interview. Oh, that's okay. You asked me to do and I thought that would be it. I thought, all right, this is just a one-off. I'm happy to do that. And here I am 3 years later.
I
I haven't
know,
escaped.
I know.
So okay. So before that, you were doing it on your own, but it wasn't just it wasn't just interviews, was it? There are, if anyone wants to get easy, go back through the archive and see the early days, sort of 4 years ago. You were doing some just on your own, just like a book review or a subject. Irwin Saunders, if you talked about a few times, obviously, but that doesn't happen anymore, does it? Are you happy not to do that in the future, or?
Yeah, the thing is, when it was obviously because of lockdowns, things became very magnified for me. So the Irwin Saunders thing, I was obsessed. I was obsessed with that whole, the pixie hunter, and who is he, and this very sort of intriguing world that he had sort of created and was presenting to everybody. So I was very, very excited and very driven about talking on a podcast about that, mainly because you know, who else is going to listen to me babble on about stuff like that? It's not like I could pick up the phone and just ring somebody randomly and say, "Have you seen what's going off with Irwin Saunders?" So yeah, it was a bit of me being a bit of a lonely peanut in a world that was going crazy at the time, and that was my big way of coping. I did do some book reviews, and that's something that we've continued to do together, which is brilliant because people often ask me, what are the best texts to read with, about the fairies and the paranormal. And I think I always come back to people and say, whatever you're drawn to, because I could give you a text that I just go, yeah, that's absolutely, for me, life changing, and somebody else might pick it up and say, no, that's really that's not my bag. But it's nice to sit down with you and say, okay, what have you been reading, what's kind of hit your bookshelves, what's important, and that kind of thing. So the only difference that you'll see since Neil's been on. So when Neil goes off on his yacht round the Caribbean and into the Bermuda Triangle, is usually when I'm doing the spookier side of things. So when I'm talking to people from the paranormal world directly. And although we do touch on subjects of the 14 nature, it's usually about sort of, ghosts, ghost hunting, ethics within the ghost hunting society and whatnot. And I do joke that scares you, but I really genuinely think it does.
All right, we won't go there. We won't go there. Well, okay. So when I joined three and a bit years ago, and like I say, since then, I don't know how many podcasts I've done with just Kate and I, probably 30 plus
Mm,
at least. But I worked out that looking back through the archive, that we've done 21 interviews with other people. Some of them have done more than one interview. So I thought what we could do is just a very sort of brief resume
mhm,
of what these people were saying, and just to give an idea of the sort of broad scope of the archive that we have, which of course anyone can go and check this out for themselves for these interviews. One thing to remember is that there was a period about two and a half years ago when we didn't have the full Zoom package.
mm.
We had the free one, and so the interviews were limited to 40 minutes, which was not ideal. It's just too short. You need an hour to flesh things out, and frequently we would come to 40 minutes and you see the timer ticking down, and it's like, right, sorry, bye.
Bye.
And it was, so that wasn't yeah, it wasn't ideal. And often after those 40-minute interviews, we would then get the person back for just a sort of debrief, and that would last for another 40 minutes. And those debriefs, we should have recorded them,
I know they were
because
they
some
were
of them were
genius.
absolute, but well, we didn't. So, you'll
Can
just
I
have to take
just
our words for it.
Before you
So let
before
me
you
just go through
hold on,
before.
before you delve into the guests, I just want to give people a real quick statistics of it. So we're at the moment we're on 2,411 subs, which you should have seen me absolutely cack myself when I got to 50 subs, and I just thought, my goodness, people are watching. And as it's gone up over time, it's been a crazy ride, and that's grown completely organically. But the overview that I want to give you is we've had two reverends, one more than once. We've had one Turner Arts prize winner, so fine artist who came on in the early doors. We've had one poet. We've had a number of professors of universities. We've had writers. We've had artists. We've had authors. So for me, having that broad range of people from all different kind of angles has been what makes the magic of Hare in the Hawthorn. So yeah, who are you going to start with? Oh, I think we've lost connection. Are you still there?
Oh, you went blank for a while there, Kate.
Okay, where did I get to?
Yeah, you're back now. You had just talked about you finished off with we've had a poet on,
Oh
which
yeah,
was
yeah, yeah,
Samuel Hurley, but
yeah.
then you froze, and I was thinking, do I fill in or whatever? We don't edit these, so this is just
No.
that'll just have to stay in as one of those little glitches. So yeah, anything else beyond a poet?
Yeah, I was just saying, poets, authors, writers. We've had a real good range of people. We've got musicians coming up in the future, so liking to cover that kind of broad spectrum of people who believe in the fairy folk. So, who are we going to begin with? Where are we going to begin with?
Well, we'll start at the beginning for me anyway, with Dr. David Luke
Yes, brilliant one.
from University of Greenwich 3 years ago. I was very pleased to co-host that one because my interest in psychedelics, theoretical and practical, it has to be said, has been long-standing for many years. And David Luke was someone who I'd never met, but whose writings very influential, very good writer on the subject, very clear, concise writer on the way from various different angles about how the use of psychedelics um, changes the psychology of someone, and especially in terms of entity encounters.
Mm.
He's written many papers on it, and quite a few books and conferences where the specific questions have been about what are the entities and how is consciousness interacting and interfacing with them. His specialism is dimethyltryptamine, DMT, which is kind of the most hardcore of the psychedelics, certainly in terms of going into another realm, whatever you want to call it, and meeting very odd entities, many of whom could be described as fairy type entities. So David was very interested in this, and it was a great conversation that went all over the place, and it was especially good because we caught him just as he was doing a research campaign of going around to people's houses who had taken DMT, and kind of taking their what's happening to you, and recording it, which is a crazy thing to do, but all verified by the research. And so that was a great conversation, and that was a good way to start off. And just saying that, I mean, how many other people talking about the fairies looking at that side of it? Not many, I don't think.
I think it's
And so
definitely
it
it's
was a
definitely
very
raising in popularity, though, isn't it? That
Oh
connection
yeah,
between the psychedelics
yeah,
and fairy experiences. The one overarching thing that I remember about that interview, and I haven't watched it for a very long time, was how utterly relaxed. I mean, really relaxed he was. He sat there and I think he supped about 4 bottles of beer while he was talking to us, and I just thought, you are genius. I loved him for that.
yeah. Brilliant. Very good, very great guy, and a very good talker. I've seen him give a presentation once. It's very, very clear, concise way of
Mm.
getting over quite complex subject matters. So David Luke was a good one. And then you asked me back to do our second one, which is Dan Green,
He's
our
another one of
friend who goes by many names, but we called him Dan Green for this, or he wants to be known as Dan Green for this particular conversation. What do you remember about Dan?
I just remember my cheeks aching. You were trying to steer him into out of his surreal kind of Dan world, and I often joke with him and say he's of pixie ilk, and he doesn't. He says he's from elf blood. But I just remember you really trying to take the reins and bring it into something that was more serious, and we were just both failing miserably. But what was coming from him, just my cheeks ached, absolutely ached after we interviewed him. He was brilliant.
Yeah, no, he was good, and he had a nice experience, an encounter experience to give us as well. But yeah, he's one of a kind, Dan, and Dan's done quite a lot of work on the Wallerton gnomes, which, as you
Yes,
know, Kate and I are very invested in. And so he was there well before us, really, wasn't he?
yes,
And so, and he swears that he's retired from all things now, but we'll rope him back in. We need to get Dan back on because
yeah.
he's a he's a chortle. He's a character. Is Dan. Um, but then we went from Dan to more serious. Another more serious person, another Doctor Jack Hunter,
Mhm.
who very much in the same vein as Dr. David Luke is, he's an academic, he's well published and takes the matter of fairies and fairy encounters, and especially fairies within the landscape. That's his specialist thing, sacred landscapes, magical landscapes. And he was, again, very, very soft-spoken guy, isn't he? And
Mm.
just comes across as having this wealth of knowledge, which at first, when because I hadn't met him before for this, and when we was just the pre-record chat, I thought, oh, he's very shy. I'm going to have to draw it out. But as soon as the record went, he was off.
Yeah,
Boom, done. It's and it was brilliant. I love that one, and we haven't had Jack back on. I think Jack would be a great guest to get back on.
definitely. I think for me as well, after interviewing yourself, I think I had a very preconceived idea of academics. And I mean, we've spoke about this privately before about sort of academia and how not having a belief system or presenting a belief system has been very much sort of embedded, especially at sort of university level. You do the subject, but your opinion on the subject from a personal standpoint is something that is frowned upon. And interviewing yourself and you saying about the experience that you had at West Kennet, which you can go back and have a look at Neil's video. But the same thing with David Luke. He spoke about his own personal experiences and what they meant to him. And then we had Jack, and he told us this beautiful story about the little people. Was it in a set of old drawers that were
That's
parading?
right. That's right.
It
Yeah.
that just it just got me. It was so nice to meet people who were in these kind of really kind of I don't know what the word is, very set in the way kind of academic situations, and but being open, just genuinely open to this is my experience and this is how it's influenced my
Yeah.
research and who I am. So yeah, for me that was a standout moment for talking with Jack. But we've definitely got to get him back on. Yeah.
Yes. It's the academia thing is, I'm pleased that people like David and Jack are in relatively high positions
Mm.
and are accepted in university. And whenever we interview these people, I'm always, one of the questions is, how do your fellow academics take it? And in their cases, it's like they're fine. They might disagree on certain things that we're saying, but it's not like we're censored or we're not allowed to go into to these subject matters. So next up, well, we had two women on the road, just in case you think it's just a bunch of blokes that we're interviewing on Hare. Oh no, we're all for equality on Hare and Hawthorn. And first up was our very good friend Jo Hickey Hall,
Yes.
who most of you will know from her, well, um, uh, social media presence and podcast presence as Modern Fairy Sightings. And I've known Jo for about 8 years, I think, and she has a wealth of knowledge about the fairies, and her main passion seems to be interviewing people who have had modern fairy experiences, which is what our podcast is about. And there's some fascinating episodes in that podcast, really eye-opening. And so when Jo was on, that's what we were mainly talking about, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And for me, I think I don't know whether I've said this publicly before, and I'm sorry, Jo, if this is I don't think she'll take offense at this at all, but I often say that oh, the name's gone out my head. So Jo for me is Marjorie T. Johnson in this incarnation. She literally is for me. She's got that very sort of timeless elegance about her as well, but she seems to have that same kind of energetic level as Marjorie, with for collecting evidence, but also being very passionate about her own experiences and gaining more experiences and having more fairy interaction. And yeah, she is, I think she's our generation. She's our Marjorie T. Johnson, and Jo is one of the Nomateers, so she is definitely part of the core three, which is myself, Neil, and Jo, who have been. We took on the mantle really of the Woollerton gnomes and furthering that research, and we took it off the supposedly retired Dan from the research that he was doing. But yeah, that interview again, Jo got to the end of it and said, oh, I forgot I was being interviewed, and
Yeah.
which was really nice. And I think that was the first one for me that had just really flowed, really flowed. I didn't feel as though I was kind of in an interview situation, an interview in that one, and I didn't feel like I had to keep up constantly to think, okay, where can we go with that, or whatever. It felt very, very natural, and that kind of fell into I think a lifelong fellowship of gnome botherers out the three of us.
Yeah, no, yeah, no, I hope so. We love Jo and the work she does, and she's become a very good friend. So that's all good. And then soon after that we had Claire Casely,
Yes.
who is again, she's an investigator of modern fairy type entity encounters, and she does a lot of her work around Dartmoor.
Mm-hmm.
She lives in Devon, and so and I'm afraid her website is just Fairy Whisperer
Yes.
is her website, and her social media presence, where she publishes a lot of this stuff. She does podcasts as well, and she does these walks out on Dartmoor with with various people, and talking about the fairies as they're walking around. So it's a very nice thing to do. She was talking about that as well as showing us her artwork, which was I love. I love Claire's artwork. And I also know that she is imminently, end of the year, I think, about to publish a book on Devon pixies,
Yes.
which I've been beta reading, a few months ago. So and it's very good. It's you know it's quite surprised. I was surprised at how academic it is, and but there's also the personal touch in there as well. So yeah, Claire, and I think Claire was another one who said, "Oh, I'd forgotten was being
Yes.
interviewed. It was just a chat."
Yeah. Again, that was a very easy, very easy interview, and I think Claire has definitely got that that connection with her immediate landscape, and I think that definitely comes through when she's talking. I mean, we both Claire and myself did a takeover from the modern fairy sightings podcast for Joe. So Joe had gone on holiday and left us in charge for why on earth she thought that was a good idea. I've got no idea, but she left me and Claire in charge for one of the episodes, and we did a
Dangerous. Yeah.
it's very dangerous. So we did a Pixies v gnome, sort of did a comparison and looked at the differences and the similarities, and we're asking the question whether these things were colloquial or whether they were actually major differences between these. And it was such good fun. It was almost like it was like a game of top trumps, and we were like giddy school kids doing that, going, the teacher's gone and left us in charge. So if anybody wants to go and watch that and have a giggle, then I highly recommend you going and having a look how we, probably bought Joe's podcast down a few pegs.
Yeah, no, I do remember that. So after Claire, we went to the other end of the spectrum, really, on many things, just to show we don't always just talk about the fairies. That's obviously the main subject matter on Hare and the Hawthorn, but sometimes, any kind of esoteric Fortean things that we want to discuss that we think viewers are going to be interested in, we'll do it. And so next up was Anthony Peake. Now, yeah, I'd known Anthony for several years before this, and I'd been on his Consciousness Hour podcast a couple of times. And well, one was on the Consciousness Hour, and then there was another one which he called something else, and that was like 3 hours. I think it's the longest interview I've ever done. And so we managed to talk him into coming. I mean, Anthony's published, I think, 12 books. I think he's about to publish his 13th. Very esteemed author, very deep thinker on many subject matters. His new book, which is about to come out, is on the near-death experience, and I bet it'll be a good one. I really do think it'll be a good one. But when he was on the podcast, unfortunately, it was another one of these 40-minute podcasts, so it was a real rush, and he was putting his idea of the eternal return, that we are reincarnated into the same life, which is, I'm not sure I completely buy it, but when you read Anthony's book, and he's a very good talker, very, very persuasive, clear speaker who can convey these massive ideas in tight language, and I think that's what he did on that podcast. But his is the example that I remember. I mean, he's just got going. We're 40 minutes in. He's just got going, and Kate's like, "Oh, sorry, we've got to end it there." So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I remember being, he was one of probably 5 guests that we've had. And I can honestly remember very little about that interview because I felt like my brain was being melted and I was trying to catch up because he would pull something apart and I'm still like getting to grips with that concept that he's pulled apart and trying to put it into a context that I could swallow. And then he was off on another one. So I was like constantly trying to sort of, it was like trying to sort of trot along against some kind of wild stallion going off. I was exhausted, but that was one of our post interview chats that was way more interesting, way more relaxed, way more personal than the actual interview that we'd done. And that I can remember that side of it because he brought these concepts back down into a very personal realm, because he talked about temporal lobe epilepsy, didn't he, and deja view
Yes.
and things like that, and that's we went on and spoke about that afterwards. But absolute, just mind melting. He was one of our mind melting guests. He was.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I did see the other day on his Facebook page that he'd met up with Whitley Strieber in London. Well, I would like to be able to fly on the wall for that conversation. That would be, imagine that, sitting down with those two. Yeah. So let's get on to some returners, some
Yes.
people who have been on more than once. And
Friends of Hare in the Hawthorn, not returners. They're
yeah,
friends of Hare in the
that
Hawthorn.
they they are. First up, Irish folklorist David Halpin, who at both times we've had David on, there's been problems with the tech for some reason. The faeries are a bit annoyed with David, talking about Irish faeries in the way he does. David's fantastic. I've known him for years, and he has the ability. He's very deeply read in Irish folklore, and he's able to extract a lot of information, but he's not just a pure folklorist and these interesting stories, which they are, but he's also a Fortean,
Yes.
and I know he's a pagan, and so he brings out the more esoteric qualities of these older stories. He'll talk about modern fairy sightings sometimes, but most of what he's trying to do is use some of the old stories up to the 20th century, and then talk about what that means in terms of our consciousness, how consciousness interacts with these entities, and is the big source. If you want to find out about David Halpin, go to Circle Stories on
Yeah.
Facebook, which he basically uses as a blog post, and very frequent, about quite short articles, about 1,000 words. Always brilliant, always a joy to read.
Mm.
I always learned something because the Irish fairies. I'm happy to write about incidents, specific examples from Irish folklore, but I'm English. I'm not.
Mm.
I'm not going to go into Irish folklore and say, right, here I am an English person. I'm going to tell you all about your traditions and what they mean. So it's great. It's great to have David on twice.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've got a massive amount of respect for him, not only for the work that he does and how utterly committed he is to digging and delving into the folklore, but I've got a lot of respect for him gatekeeping, not gatekeeping, but we've had chats with him about that, about the boundaries of really understanding folklore from being from the country that you're writing about, and it tends to have a different depth to it. And he definitely has that. He has that, when you're in that landscape and you understand the landscape, you understand the communities, you understand the folklore because you've been told since you were a baby. Um,
Yep.
and I like the fact that he stands his ground, and he stands his ground on a lot of things, and I've got a lot of respect for David for doing that. And yeah, more and more so. And like you say, the things that he writes about, I literally, what information he can pack into such a fairly short article, is crazy. It's crazy. I do enjoy reading his stuff. Oh, we froze again. Are we back?
Yeah, no, he's great. Another friend.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, another friend
Yeah.
here in Hawthorn is American friend Joshua Cutchin, who has been on twice. And the first time he was talking about his book, Ecology of Souls, the massive, absolute magnum opus of Joshua, which is varies, but I mean, well, Joshua's thesis, as is mine to a large degree, is that all of the phenomenon, all of the fairies, ghosts, UFOs, they're all actually coming from the same place. And we've talked
Yes.
about this many times on Hare and the Hawthorn, but Joshua has probably written about it more than anybody else,
Yeah.
most of which is in Ecology of Souls.
Yeah.
And so the first time he was talking about that, and again it was another one of these 40-minute ones where we're just getting into the depth of the conversation. We have to end it. And then the second time we talked to Joshua was just after he'd published his novel. It was earlier this year, which is another novel with which I wrote a little blurb on the back of it. And when I wrote the original blurb, I put the word fairies in.
Well, that's a first in Hare in the Hawthorn. We just got completely booted out of Zoom. I'm just waiting for Neil to reconnect. I have no idea why that happened. And I'm hoping we
Did you
kind of. Yeah, I can hear you.
hear me?
Yeah, I don't think you've got the camera on though.
Well, me.
And we're back. I'm hoping we can get Neil back on. We were just finishing off saying about the lovely Joshua. So we're back. I can see you.
All right, we're recording, are we?
Yeah, we're recording. I'm hoping it's going to be seamless, but never know on Hare in the Hawthorn, do you? No, we've gone again. I think we might have to have a part two
All right, we'll
about.
sort that out afterwards. But yeah,
We might have to have a part two.
yeah, you're freezing up. The fairies aren't happy about the
No,
thing.
they're not. There's definitely gremlins. Oh. So I'm going to say goodbye. It looks like we've lost Neil completely. We will have a part two of the 100th episode of Hare in the Hawthorn. I'm hoping all this is seamless. We shall soon find out. So we'll see you very soon.